Right, so I can see, well, first of all, let me welcome you to the newspaper reading class. So it's nice to see some students I already know. That is really, it's nice for me. It's more relaxing. Okay, so what we are going to do in this course, we will not read current newspapers. Today, I will give you a brief introduction to British newspapers and the different types of newspapers, where you can find articles in a newspaper, and just overall knowledge on newspapers. This is only for today, but this will already be part of the exam, because that's really nice to ask in the exam. So that's just general overall knowledge on newspapers. And you also find some handout. So in your homework center, in your resource center, you found a PPT and this handout, this long handout for today. And for the next classes, you will again have a PPT and always something to print out. Because, as I say today, I will tell you some things about newspapers in general. And because I do not want to put everything on the PPT, because on the PPT, you should just have some key words. But I know it's hard for you to understand everything I say. So most of what I say will be on the printout. And for the next classes, on the printout will be newspaper articles. Because this is what we are going to do. We will read articles from newspapers, and we will do different kinds of exercises for those newspapers. So I will provide, some exercises will remain the same, and I will also give you some advice how to read the articles. So today will be more an overall view. How do I read a newspaper? What can I find in a newspaper? And later we will focus on reading the articles itself and how can newspaper reading help you to improve your English. Because I think that's what is most interesting for you rather than the topic itself. And as I said, I will not use brand new articles, but I will use some articles from books, from different kinds of books. And the good thing about those articles is they are adjusted, so they are from Chinese books, and they are adjusted to your students, to your needs. So it's not too hard. Because in the beginning I tried to look for some newspaper articles, but there is a big problem. If I take a newspaper that is not of a very good quality, it contains a lot of slang expressions. That makes it hard to read. If I take a very high-class newspaper, the sentences are that long. That also makes it hard to read. So I looked for material that is suitable, that we can manage in class. So, and we will do this from next week on, and I would advise you to next week if you have the time, read the articles before class, because the articles are rather long, and it might be hard to understand them on first reading. So today we will also talk about how do I read an article, what is useful to do, what should I not do, and we will talk about those kind of things. Right, first of all, if you look on your handout, the first question, of course, is the functions of a newspaper. So what does a newspaper do? Now, a newspaper, first of all, it informs by supplying facts, figures, scores, prices, charts, maps, photos, and illustrations. So, however, as we move along, you will see a newspaper does not only have facts. right? So sometimes people just write because they write something, because they want to sell the newspaper. And of course, it's important to understand what is really true, what is printed, and what do they just print to sell, to make the newspaper sell. Then, a newspaper educates by going beyond basic facts in the in-depth analysis of feature stories and editorials. So one thing that is very important to know about a newspaper and that we will learn tonight, and what I want you to keep in mind is, in a newspaper, you have 3 types of articles. One is really news. The other one is additional information, but not necessarily new. And then you have opinions. You have opinions, and that there is a big difference between what somebody thinks and what is actually true. You know that. You can think something is true, but still it does not mean it's true, right? We all had that experience. And the same is what you can find in the newspaper. Then a newspaper provides a print marketplace for advertisers and prospective customers. So usually in newspapers you have a lot of advertising. And some people are really, really angry. They say, why are there so many advertisements in the newspaper? I want information and not just ads. But actually, the advertisements, as business students, I'm quite sure you know this, they keep the newspaper price low. Because if you have no advertisements in your magazines or newspapers, it would be very, very expensive. Okay. Right, and what you see here is a guy from the UK selling different types of newspapers. And there are actually 2 different kinds of words, a newspaper and a magazine, right? And a magazine, that's like a little book, right? It's that female type of thing or men's health, for example. And a lot of that you have over here in China are just translations from American magazines that I have seen. And a newspaper is more something like the Shanghai Daily, right? So that would be an example for a newspaper. Right, then we have different types of newspapers. There are different ways how to qualify a newspaper. So why do we need to know this? Because it helps you, it gives you a clue on how to study different sorts of material. So different sorts of documents hold information in different places and different ways. And they have different depths and breadths of coverage. By understanding the layout of the material you are reading, you can extract useful information more efficiently. So this is, for example, if you know this is a daily newspaper, right? You will know, okay, the information will not be from last month. But if you know a newspaper, it's published only once a month, there will be different things and different sections, and you know where to find them. Now, reading newspapers, these newspapers in general tend to give a very fragmented coverage of an area. That means they only give you pieces of information. They will typically only concentrate on the most interesting and glamorous parts of a topic. This helps them to sell copies. They will often ignore less interesting information that may be essential to a full understanding of a subject. Typically, areas of useful information are padded out with large amounts of irrelevant waffle or with advertising. The most effective way of getting information from newspaper is to scan the contents table or indexes and turn directly to interesting articles. If you find an article useful, then you cut it and file it in a folder, specifically covering that sort of information. In this way, you can build up a set of related articles that may begin to explain the subject. Newspapers tend to be arranged in sections, and if you read a paper more often, you can learn quickly which sections are useful and which ones you can skip altogether. So I think for all of us, it might be different what we are interested in, right? So if you want to focus on learning business English, you will go to the business section. Now, if you just think, oh, I've got enough business English at the college, I want some gossip, right? So you will read the part about Paris Hilton, for example. And if you are, let's say, you are more interested in the environment, and you want to learn the vocabulary that goes together with the environment, you can cut out the articles. And at first, of course, the beginning is very hard. You will have difficulties understanding it, but if you look for some vocabulary and you start collecting those articles, you will understand it better and better, right? Okay, now as I said, so there are different types of newspapers, and there are different ways how to classify a newspaper. And the first is frequency of publication. So a newspaper may appear daily, it may appear weekly, or monthly. So a daily, you already have this in the name, that is like Shanghai Daily, appears every day. Some weekly, these are, especially in Great Britain, they have Sunday papers, and they are really thick. So they have like the Telegraph, you have the Daily Telegraph, but they have a special edition on Sunday. And of course this appears only weekly. And then we have some monthly papers, and these papers that appear monthly will be, of course, very specialized papers, right? So there is not so many news. This is, for example, this might be papers for doctors. Then we have the patterns of distribution. That would be international, national, regional, or local. We have the format, and that is really very interesting, that we have the word tabloid, broadsheet, Berlin, midi, and compact. So that has a historical reason. So the tabloid is the smaller one. I will talk about this later. Broadsheet. Now, I'm quite sure you know what sheet is, a sheet of paper, and broad means big. And those broadsheet papers, these are the really big papers, and historically, the tabloid papers were the smaller ones that focused on people who would read in the buses on their way to work, while the broadsheet were the big ones people used to read in the library. Now, firstly, the word format refers to the size of a newspaper. But you will see as we move on, meanwhile, it also refers to the content. And there are those two important ones, tabloid, broadsheet, and there is now this new third term, compact. And compact is basically the same size or format as tabloid, but it means the newspaper is a high-quality newspaper which is only as big as the tabloids, which tend to be of not such a good quality. But we will see this in a minute. So we said we have a difference in the frequency of publication, that is, how often they are published. And I said daily and weekly, like the Sunday papers, I said, or some supplements, and monthly. And for most European papers, they have, as I said, a weekend edition, and in the weekend edition, you will also find the job market, so the job offers and things like this, or you will have a supplement about what is new in the cinema or on literature or things like this. Right. So examples for daily newspapers, that is for British daily newspapers. The Daily Telegraph, that is really very famous. So for my examples, I chose the most famous ones. The Daily Telegraph, which is a daily quality newspaper. right? That means the style of the language is very high and the information is very reliable. It's very true and good information. The Daily Mail is a daily mid-market newspaper, which means the quality so-so. So it has some information, but not really in depth, and maybe the language is not as high. Then in the Sun, that is a daily popular newspaper. Now, we call it popular, so that means a lot of people buy it, but actually the information is very little, right? We will see this later. In the Sun, you don't have political news, or you don't have very sophisticated news. What you have is, so who is whose boyfriend, right? Information like this, right? But it sells. People want to know that. And if you now ask me, so what is the Shanghai Daily? I would say the Shanghai Daily is like a daily mid-market newspaper. And it's, if you think of the size of the Shanghai Daily, it's not really one of those broadsheets. But as we see, the broadsheets are getting smaller anyway. Okay, and this is an example for the Daily Telegraph. And I got this from the internet, the picture. And what you see here, it has, of course, pictures, because that's first what you see when you walk by the newspaper stand, you see the pictures. But you can see it also has a lot of writing. And that is from the front page. You can already tell whether you have a quality newspaper or whether you have a non-quality newspaper. And another thing is, you see the Daily Telegraph, you see the title is written in black. The popular newspapers, the title is written in red, and they are also called red tops. So here you can tell, from the first look, you can tell, okay, this is a quality newspaper. And here, the word broadsheet, big newspaper, broadsheet, already tells you it's a quality newspaper. Here we have the Daily Mail, a daily mid-market newspaper, and you see there is directly there is a difference. You have a lot lesser writing, but big pictures, and you have something that attracts the people's attention at once. Murder us, right? So everybody, if you walk by and you see this, you go like, what? Who? I want to know. So if you look here, you see the headline is, Oxford is to stop the rot. Who is interested in that, right? So that's about Oxford, whatever, but murder us. Everybody's interested in murder. So, and then you have finally the Sun. As I said, this is a daily popular newspaper, and this is what we call a tabloid newspaper. So here you see that is red top, and the word red top refers to this red section here. So if we go back and compare this, for them it's black. Again, Daily Mail, black, but this one is red. And I know for Chinese people, the color red is something very beautiful. That's historically. Actually, this is very different for Western people, really very different. To us, red is not a good color. Red means stop. Red means warning. Red is a color of signal. But we don't think it's a good color. So it's very unlikely that unless we know about Chinese people, we will hand you a present that is wrapped in red paper, right? Because for us, it's not something good. And this is another difference. So we think that if something is all in black and white and clear, it's nice. It looks nice and tidy to us. But Chinese people, I know that they like it if it's colored and a lot of pictures and shiny, but it's just a cultural difference, right? So, but this is what you have to know when you look at those newspapers. So the red color does not signalize something beautiful or something quality. It's rather to attract your attention. Look here. And then, of course, you can see very little text, very little words, printed in bold, and a big picture. And now, if you compare this here, little picture, a lot of text, and the headline is not that big, right? And here, the pictures are getting bigger, the headlines are getting bigger, And here you only have a headline. And that already tells you it's not a quality newspaper. Wherever you look in the newspaper, there will be no more text. Okay. So then we also have weekly newspapers. Now the Sunday papers, supplements, as I said, and some papers are published daily, but have special weekend edition, like the Sunday Times. And the Sunday Times is an old newspaper comparably, goes back to 1822. The Sunday Telegraph is not that old, and then the Weekly Telegraph. Here we have the Sunday Times, which you only have weekly. Right, that's the only picture of a weekly one. And then we said we also have monthly newspapers, and as I said, these are specialist newspapers, or what we call restricted circulation newspapers. These are newspapers for a special school or a university. So I don't know if Chinese universities and schools have that. We have that in Europe a lot, or in America, that a university has its own newspaper. And of course, in this university newspaper, you have only the news concerning the university. So for example, we have a new dean. We have a new professor, a new foreign teacher. Then that will be in the university's newspaper, right? Only news concerning the university. Right. So then I said size or format. So this is what you have already seen. Tabloid, broadsheet, and then something which is called the Berlin format and the compact format. Now, the tabloids, they are also called popular papers. And here you got their size, so they are a little smaller than the real broadsheets, and they have, as I already pointed out, they have this red top. Actually, tabloids are half the size of broadsheets, and they often are perceived as sensationalist in contrast to broadsheets. So an example would be the Sun, as we have already seen, the National Enquirer, National Ledger, Star Magazine. For America, it would be New York Post or the Globe. So, actually, the tabloids, the popular papers, mainly cover the UK gossip in the UK, entertainment and sports news. They are written using casual English, and the use of slang can make them difficult to understand for foreigners. Articles are often short and illustrated with pictures. They cover all national and international news, often contain a certain amount of gossipy or scandalous news item or more personal stories. Do you know the term gossip? Do you understand that? Gossip? Gossip? Familiar? No? Well, if I explain the concept to you, it's clear at once. Gossip is like, have you heard that her sister is pregnant? Wow, no, you gotta be kidding. So that means it's just talking about people, right? That is called gossip. It's spelled G-O-S-S-I-P, gossip. Very important word, gossip. And gossip in this case means exactly the contrast to facts, to information, right? Because gossip is just, I heard that, and I have no idea whether it's true or not, right? But it's interesting to talk about. And of course, gossip will be about Paris Hilton, about Britney Spears, right? Just the other day I read on my online newspaper that they printed a goodbye letter by Britney Spears, right? But then the next day they printed, oh no, it's not true, right? And that's the thing about gossip. You never know whether it is true or not. Right, so that is gossip, and that is the tabloid papers. They print more gossip than actual information. Now, and this is why they have a lot of photos in those newspapers, because they don't have that much information. Now, a tabloid is a newspaper industry term which refers to smaller newspaper format per spread, And it's a weekly or semi-weekly alternative newspaper that focuses on local interest stories and entertainment. Often it can be distributed for free. So sometimes you have people standing in front of the supermarket and they will hand out a kind of newspaper for free. So this is also a tabloid. Now, and I heard that in the People's Republic of China, so you also have a lot of them, which I, of course, cannot read, unfortunately. Now, the term tabloid can also refer to a newspaper that tends to emphasize sensational crime stories, gossip columns, and about the personal lives of celebrity and sports stars, and we call that junk food news. Now, often tabloid newspapers, they talk about sex, about drugs, and some other private conduct of celebrities, and it's actually, it's not really true in most cases. So if you remember about Princess Diana, they used to print a lot of things about her. And in Britain, especially in Britain, this kind of newspaper of news is called tabloid press. And they tend to be simple and sensationally written, and they give more prominence than broadsheets to celebrity and crime story and hoaxes. Now, this is a word which might be important for newspapers, a hoax, and that is spelled H-O-A-X, a hoax, and that is like a joke. It's something which is not true. H-O-A-X, hoax. It's a story in a newspaper which is not true. And also those tabloid papers, they tend to take a radical political position. And if they talk about politics, they don't give you the facts. But they tend to talk more about emotions, like it is so mean what the Prime Minister said, than actually telling what he said. Right, now on the history of the word tabloid, if you look at this word tabloid, to me it sounds more like a medicine than anything else. And actually the word tabloid began as a trademark of the pharmaceutical company Burroughs in London, and it was registered in 1884 as a fancy word for a compressed pharmaceutical. That means a compressed pharmaceutical. So if you think some pills that these are not pills, some medicine is that big, but some medicine is very, very small, right? It's very compressed and it's very easy to swallow. And that's what tabloid means. So it's very easy to swallow. And the same is true for this kind of news. You don't have to think a lot. It's not very hard to read. It's very easy to read, very easy to swallow. So, and that's why they also call this tabloid journalism. And it preceded the smaller newspaper that contained it. Right. So, let's summarize. The tabloid content is all national and international news. So, we said newspapers can appear daily or weekly or monthly, and they can be broadsheet or tabloid, but actually a newspaper can appear daily and can be a tabloid and a broadsheet. So it does not have to be one thing or the other. It can appear daily and still be a tabloid newspaper. So and here you have the word, gossipy. So here you have the word gossip and the explanation sensationalist or scandalous new items. Gossipy. And that's for the content, for what you can find in such a tabloid newspaper, personal stories and crime stories. So, and that also means, of course, if you are in the UK, or if you sometimes hear the news sellers, they have papers or magazines from the UK or from America, and if you buy this, and if you can tell, well, this is obviously a tabloid paper, you will know what to think of what is in the newspaper, right? Okay. Then the tabloid style, simple writing style. It's dominated by pictures, That means the most important thing is not the words, not the text, but the photographs. And it is directed at the more sensational end of the market. So that means the people who buy this newspaper are probably not how would you say, well, a university professor in Germany would never be seen reading a tabloid newspaper, right? Because that it basically means you are interested in sex and crime and all that things, right? So you would never see a university professor reading that. So in here you have some front page examples for what a tabloid newspaper looks like. And you can see what I just told you. It's focused on the photographs, right? Big photographs. And very little text in both cases. And the thing that will attract your attention is a big headline. And here it says, Harry the Nazi, right? And that was, I remember the event when Prince Harry came to a costume party dressed up as a Nazi officer, right? And here, I don't know what this is about, but here you see Kate, and you might remember this was some years ago when she was arrested for the possession of drugs, right? And she says, I will face police. And again, you see here the red tops, so that tells you right away this is not a quality newspaper. Then we have the broadsheet format, and this is, as I said, the largest type of newspapers. And they cover all national and international news, but they cover it in a serious or in a more formal way. So the difference would be, if you go back here, right, you have one event, but while those people write, Kate says, I will face police, right? In a broadsheet newspaper, you would read, Kate Moss was arrested for drug possession, right? So it would be a totally different style of telling you what has happened. Now, as I said, broadsheet content, they cover all national and international news, often in a serious or in a formal way. The broadsheet style, it aims at the intellect. That means it aims at your brain. You really have to think about it. That's what I said. The sentences are very long. They tend to be long. And they are called quality or serious-minded newspapers. And the emphasis, that means the main stress, is on the text. They have few photographs, and if they have a photograph, it serves to illustrate and not to convey the news. It means the photo, it's more like an explanation, but it is not the most important thing, right? And here you see, there you have the Financial Times, and the Financial Times is a very good example for a broadsheet. And here you see you have a lot of text, very few pictures, and the picture that you have does not tell you so much about the news event. It serves more to make it a bit more interesting. And here you can compare this, right? Here you have a broadsheet newspaper. Here you have a tabloid. And there you directly see the big difference. Small text, a lot of text, right? Big picture, smaller picture, right? And again, black hat, red top on the other side. Now then we have the compact format, and the compact format is most of the time about the same size as the tabloid format. Why do we have a third word? Because meanwhile, during history, if you said tabloid, it's the same as saying not good quality. And if you say broadsheet, it's the same as saying high quality. Now, as I said, the broadsheet papers were for really educated people who did not work. But they had the time to read the newspaper in the library, right? And there you had a lot of space to really put the newspaper on the table and read it. But meanwhile, nobody has that much time anymore. and people want to read the newspaper in the bus. Now, not even in Europe, where the buses are not as crowded as in China, you cannot go like this with your broadsheet newspaper. No way, right? You will just smash other people. And so that is why those serious quality newspapers said, okay, we have to downsize. We have to get smaller, otherwise people will no longer read us. And then they said, but we don't want to be called tabloid, because tabloid means non-quality, but our content is quality. And so they decided to call it a compact format. So compact format means it was a broadsheet newspaper, but because we cannot use broadsheet anymore today, we call it a compact newspaper. And the Independent and the Times, both very old and very famous British newspapers, they have switched to this compact-sized format, which was traditionally used by tabloids, right? So this is, traditionally we had bad newspapers and good newspapers, and you could tell just from the size which is which, right? Big newspaper, broadsheet, good quality. Small newspaper, small, tabloid, as I said, small newspaper, small spread, small quality, right? But since people want smaller size newspapers, the big newspapers had to change, and they call themselves compact format, or sometimes it's called Berlin or MIDI format. There are different words for this. Berlin format, it's a little bit bigger than the compact, and the Guardian, which used to be a broadsheet paper, switched to this format. Right, they also switched. Then we have, again, different types of newspapers. We said we can differentiate them according to their frequency of publication, daily, weekly, or monthly. Then we have broadsheet or tabloid, and we can also say, well, it depends on whether they just talk about national events or regional, local, or restricted circulation. Now, and you have to think of the newspaper, actually they came from Europe, and Great Britain, I think, was one of the first countries to have newspapers. And so that's basically what I'm talking about when I say a national newspaper. Great Britain is a lot smaller than China, right? So if I say, like, the Shanghai Daily is for the Shanghai region, wow, that is already a big part. So if we are talking about British regional papers, we are talking about a lot smaller area than a region in China, right? And then we have local newspapers, and I guess you would not say the Shanghai Daily is a local newspaper, right? Because although it's local to Shanghai, but Shanghai is so big that it's more a regional newspaper than a local one. And a local one would be for a very small village, right? So that's what you have in Europe, and there you only have the news that relate to this one village. That would be like the village's football club has won a match, right? Nobody else is interested in it but the villagers. So that's why you have it in a special, separate newspaper. And as I said, restricted circulation papers, that's for a university or a school. Or you might have it for a special group, like a women's newspaper or something like this. Now, national is, again, that's a newspaper which covers the news across the whole country, together with some international news. Well, there are some international newspapers, but there are actually very, very few, where you have international news from all countries, but most of the time you will have a national newspaper that has just some national news and the most important international news. Then we have the serious broadsheet format papers, which are national. That is the Daily Telegraph, and it's taken to be a conservative newspaper. Then we have the Financial Times, and that is a business-oriented daily paper, and the Sunday Times with all kinds of information. We have national papers, which are middle market papers. that would be Daily Express or the Sunday Express. And that's where you have the phenomenon we talked about before. They were broadsheet until 1977, and they are now published in the compact format. The Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, broadsheet until 1971, and now also published in that smaller format. And here, of course, you can say daily, that's where it appears every day, and then a special weekend edition. Why do we have special weekend editions? Because usually people are free on Sunday to read the newspaper, right? So we have the same thing in Germany, and usually what the father of the family will do, he will sit at the breakfast table, have a nice breakfast, reading the newspaper, and I remember my grandfather, he would then read out to all of us, wow, look what happened. So nobody else had to read the newspaper, Grandpa would provide us with the information. Right. So then we have national tabloids, the Daily Star, the People, the Daily Mirror. And we have, as I said, regional papers which contain some national and international news, but focuses on news relating to a specific area of the country. Local, they contain some national and international news, but focuses on fairly local news topics, usually based around towns, cities, or groups of villages. And keep in mind, European towns are a lot smaller than Chinese towns. Restricted circulation, specialist newspapers, or like university newspapers, or special newspapers for doctors or for musicians, something like this. And of course, those restricted circulation papers will probably not appear daily, right? Because there's just not enough information. Then the types of articles, this is another way of differentiating. As I said before, we have different types of articles in a newspaper. Now, why is that important for you to know? Because if you can recognize the type of an article, you can extract the information from it very quickly and efficiently. Articles within newspapers and magazines tend to be in three main types. So here we have news articles, feature articles, and opinion articles. Now, and in the news article, here is the most important information, and it's presented first, with information being less and less useful as the article progresses. News articles are designed to explain the key point first, and then flesh them out with detail. For the featured article, these are written to provide entertainment or background on a subject. Typically, the most important information is in the body of the text. Then we have opinion articles, and the opinion articles present a point of view. And here the most important information is contained in the introduction and the summary, with the middle of the article containing supporting arguments. Now, the news article, of course, will also be on your front page of the newspaper, right? I think that's almost goes without saying, because that's what is really new. And they call this hard news, because that is really what is brand new, what nobody has heard before. Then we have some soft news in the featured articles. Now, of course, if you want to have a newspaper on a daily basis, you cannot really count that there is something going to happen, right? If something has to be news, something has to happen. And of course, it's great when somebody dies, right? Because then you have your news article saved, right? Like I remember this last year in summer, a very famous opera star died, Pavarotti. And then, of course, it was on the newspaper, on the front page, on all kind of newspapers, and that really was a news article. Famous opera star died, right? And then that was hard news. Now, the featured articles, of course, were the soft news. That was days after he had died, right? Okay, meanwhile, everybody knew he was dead. Really, everybody knew. And then it moved from the front page, you could find some more information inside the newspaper on his life, on his wife, on his children, right? Because people, of course, were still interested, but it was not really new, right? If you wanted to, you could get this information anywhere. And that is what we call feature articles. And then, of course, opinion articles. You quite often have a column where somebody just writes the opinion. That might be somebody famous from television or just another writer. And these opinion articles, you really have to be careful. They are often, the editorial is one of them, and quite often they are more inside later in the newspaper. They are written for entertainment. And now I heard a lot of times Chinese people tended to mistake this for a real true news article, but it is not. In the opinion article, authors write just what they think is on their mind, what they want to say, but it does not have to be true, right? And if they write, I wish the Queen would be abolished tomorrow, right? So nothing is going to happen, right? So do not mistake this for some kind of information. So you have true news articles, you have background information articles, and just where somebody writes the opinion. You have the same thing in the Shanghai Daily. So for next week, maybe everybody can bring a Shanghai Daily. We can have a look at the kind of articles and the sections in the Shanghai Daily to demonstrate what we say today. And they also have editorials where the Chinese writers say, well, I want to say what I think about whatever, but this is just an opinion. This is not really considered as news, right? And it's one of the 3 types of news articles you have. And of course, for our next articles we will be talking about, these are feature articles, right? Because if we talk about news articles, they will be no longer news we talk about here, so I looked for feature articles. But still, all of them are considered articles of a newspaper and are in a newspaper. And actually, very few are really hard news in a newspaper. Right. And, well, one more thing about the feature articles. Of course, a newspaper always has, like, the same amount of pages. And if just not enough new things happen, then you will have more feature articles, of course. Because you cannot sell a newspaper for the same price every day and not have enough pages, right? So that is the job of the editor in a newspaper, to put together all the articles and to choose them. Right. So this is what you see here. That is from the UK Association of Online Publishers. And here you have the different sections. And one section, news. And here they call it latest news. That is what we just call the hard news, right? The real news articles. And then they have the other section, features, right? And is the third type. It's like feature articles. And they have something called archive, and that is very old articles, right? So if you really have no other choice, then you go there probably. Okay. Now, then here you see, in the Telegraph, we have the different sections, home, news, sports, and here you have the section, what is really news, right? And you have business, travel, job, motoring, telegraph, and again here you can go down, news, home, and here you have the UK politics, picture galleries. And you can see here, this one, how about that? That will be opinion. Right? So they have different names in different newspapers, and this is where what I said, when you really want efficiently to read a newspaper, don't just browse through it, but really think, what is it I want to read, right? And then check, am I interested in news, sport, business, or travel? And then you can go directly there and find an article that really interests you. Right here, we have the features, right? So you can see here they have, again, news, sports. The section remains the same. And here you have feature articles. And one of the features is Sir Trevor McDonald's second coming, blah, 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 blah. So this is about just a person, and it's a person of general interest. So it's something people might be interested in, but it's nothing really new. It's just something to fill, more or less, to fill the pages. Here again, Telegraph, UK. That is definitely opinion. And they no longer call it just opinion or editorial. They say, my Telegraph. You can start a blog, join debates, bookmark articles, and form a community. So this is really new because that's from the online edition. So in older days, so back when I was young, you had to write a letter to the newspaper. If you wanted to express your opinion, you wrote a letter to the editor. And because now most of the newspapers have an online edition, you can just directly send an email to them. And so they no longer call it opinion, but here they call it my Telegraph. And if you want to say something, you can directly write to the newspaper. Here, for the New York Times, they still call it opinion. That's what you see here, right? And here you have the famous term editorial. And the editorial is something you also find in the Shanghai Daily. If you want to get out and buy the Shanghai Daily just for practice, because it's an English-speaking newspaper, then you will find they also have a section called editorials. And that, of course, it will be on a topic which is in the news, but it will give you the opinion of a certain writer. That is called editorials or editorial. Then, what I said, the columnist, that is, while the editor is the one who puts together all the articles for the newspaper, so he's an important person in the newspaper business, a columnist is just a journalist writing for the newspaper. Here you have him, Frank Rich, and again he expresses his opinions. And here you have the section, so editorials, columnists, and here letters, and this is where the readers express their opinion, where the readers can write to the newspaper. Okay. Again, that is opinion. Here you have again some more opinion from the Los Angeles Times. Editorials open at letters. Right, and then we have the actual news article, but before we talk about this, I think it's time for a break. Let's have a 5-minute break. Let's have a 5-minute break.